So I do remember in one of those stretches where there was absolutely nobody around, apart from me and my thoughts, there was a set of shops. I just remember a little kid, a little boy, just ran out from the shops with a bottle of water, and he sort of ran out in front of me, and obviously spoke in Arabic, and he handed it to me, and he started to clap and dance and wave as I ran past. It was just a really nice moment. So this is the medal from the Muscat Marathon, which was a couple of days ago now. And let's put it this way, this marathon was a little bit of a struggle.
Absolutely horrific.
In fact, it probably was the most difficult marathons that I've ever completed.
That was a really tough marathon.
So if you've ever run a marathon before, maybe you're thinking about running a marathon, or maybe you're just about to run your first marathon, I think you'll find this video quite valuable, because I want to identify some of the things that I think contributed to it becoming a difficult marathon. So in terms of training, I only had 6 weeks to train for this marathon. And the real reason for that was because in December, I ran the Abu Dhabi Marathon. And after that marathon, I gave myself 2 weeks off, so no running at all for 2 weeks. So I didn't start training for this marathon until the first week of January. So I knew it would be short, I knew it would be tight, and I know that 6 weeks is just not enough time to properly train and properly prepare for a marathon. But that's all the time that I had. So I had to use the time I had as well as I could. And because I just trained for and ran the Abu Dhabi Marathon, I thought that the training for that would roll over into this training block. And I run all year round, so my base fitness is pretty good, I would say. So I just assumed that, you know, things would just tick on, just tick by, even though I only had 6 weeks, that I'd be okay. I did most of the runs during the week, so whether that was uphill repeats, easy pace runs, or some kind of speed work, whether that's intervals or tempo sessions, I did all those pretty religiously. I think I skipped maybe 1, 2, or actually maybe even 3 runs throughout the 6 weeks due to work commitments and other things that I had to do. But I guess one key area, so looking back now, I think did have a negative effect on the marathon, on my marathon performance, and that was the lack of long runs. So I managed to do probably 4, I would say, long runs. And out of those 4, only 1 was 2.5 hours, 3 hours long. So I only managed to do 1 long run that was 32 kilometers. The rest were either, you know, around about 20 kilometers, or I think I got up to 25 kilometers. And I think just the lack of those long runs really did have an impact on the marathon. So when I got to the 20 kilometer mark, so the 13-mile mark in the marathon, I'm not saying I hit a wall, but I did feel the lack of long runs in my legs. I did think at that point, oh, I've not been over this distance so many times for such a while. So I think the lack of long runs definitely had an impact. And I think generally speaking, 6 weeks is not enough time to prepare for a marathon, especially if you want to do well in it. I think typically my marathon training blocks are anywhere between 10 and 12 weeks in length. And I think that is what I'll do going forward, a minimum of 10 weeks to train for a marathon. And another thing that I noticed, because the training block was so short, I couldn't really taper properly. I think I managed probably 2 or 3 or I think maybe 4 days of tapering where I reduced the volume but kept the intensity up. And I think that's just not enough I just don't think my body was rested enough going into the marathon. So typically a 2-week taper or a 10-day taper is probably the best way to do it going forward. Now, in the days leading up to the marathon, and obviously this was an international marathon, so it meant an hour's flight, it meant, staying in the hotel. The few days before the marathon, I started to carb load 3 days before. Now, the idea was to start, the first day of carb loading pretty light. So I was aiming for around about 400 grams of carbohydrates. And then 2 days out from a marathon, I would increase that to around about 500, 550 grams of carbohydrates. And then in the day before, I would increase that to around about 600, 650 grams of carbs. So that was the plan, and I think I stuck to it, especially on the third day out and the second day out, which was the day I was flying to Muscat. But I guess the day before the marathon is where I think I may have made a couple of errors in terms of carb loading. So normally I would take the food with me that I'm gonna eat. So I would pack, some pasta or some pot rice or a huge quantity of bagels, etc. But this time I didn't pack all of the food that I normally would take. And the reason why is because I thought Muscat, there'll be lots of restaurants that would be serving pasta, serving rice, serving pizza. And that was the case. The day before the marathon, we did find a few places that did serve all of those things. And so I did manage to eat some rice and some pasta in the afternoon of the day before the marathon. But I just didn't know how much carbs were in there. And obviously I tried to top it up with drinking orange juice and drinking energy drinks throughout the day. In the evening, we did find a place that did a very good spaghetti bolognese and a pizza, which I ate, and I started to work out the carbohydrates, and I thought, I probably hit the total for the day. But I think a real big mistake that I did was I just ate too late. I think it was about 7 p.m. the night before the marathon that I started to eat the last carb-loaded food. And the marathon was due to start at 6 a.m. the following morning. So that's, 11 hours before the marathon, I was still eating my carb-heavy food. And I just don't think that was enough time for the food to digest. I just think it was too late. So typically I would normally eat around about 5 p.m. the night before a marathon. But just the way the day panned out, 7 p.m. was the time that we could sit down and actually eat. So I think that was a bit of a contributing factor, because in the morning, I did still feel quite heavy and quite, bloated due to all the carbs. And I was still meant to eat a carb-heavy breakfast. So I had a banana, a pot porridge, a bagel, and a big glass of orange juice as well. So after I ate all that, I did really feel quite heavy and quite sluggish.
Absolutely horrific.
So I just think the amount of carbs may have been too much and may have been eaten too late the night before. And I think relating to that, because I ate so late, I had difficulty getting to sleep. No, we're not going to get 8, 9, 10 hours of wonderful, blissful sleep before the marathon. But I think I was still wide awake at 11 p.m. And don't forget, the marathon was at 6 a.m. the next morning. So my alarm was set for 4 a.m. So I was not even asleep at 11 p.m. And I think I got up way before the alarm clock went off. So I think I was awake at 3 a.m. So that was maximum of 4 hours of sleep. And I think Whoop says it was 5 hours or 5.5. I think it was more like 4 hours. And I just don't think that is enough time. I just don't think that is enough sleep the night before a marathon. So I think the carb load, the late carb load, contributed to the lack of sleep, which I think contributed to me feeling tired in the morning and not quite as ready to go, or raring to go for the marathon. So I think that was another contributing factor that had a real big impact on the marathon itself. So like I say, the alarm went off at 4 a.m, but I was wide awake anyway. I was already dressed, I had my bib on, I had all my gear ready, I had my belt on, ready to put the energy gels in and the big endurance carb drink that I was going to take on the course with me. And the idea was we were going to get a taxi to a designated car park. And at this car park, there was going to be a marathon shuttle bus that would take us directly to the marathon start area. So we left the hotel at 4:20, we got a taxi, and there were a few delays getting to the car park. And it was only a 5-minute trip, apparently, but that trip took probably 15 minutes. So we were slightly behind schedule getting to the car park. But not an issue. My aim was to get to the start area at about 5 a.m. So that gave me a full hour to do some workout, to do maybe a little run, and just to get myself ready for the marathon. So we didn't arrive to the car park until about 4:40, and it was quiet. There were no runners around. The bus was there. The bus was ready to take us to the start area. When we got on the bus, on the way, we hit a massive traffic jam. So lots of people in their cars were trying to get to the start area in the cars, which caused a huge traffic congestion. I think we were stuck on that bus stationary for, I think, nearly 30 minutes, which, obviously we wanted to get there for 5 a.m. and we didn't actually arrive to the start area until, I'd say, 5:25. So that was 30 minutes before the marathon, which I'm not saying I was stressed or panicking, but I don't think 30 minutes arriving at the start area is enough time to get yourself ready, to psych yourself up, to go to the toilet, to have your last minute drinks or nutrition. So I think that maybe caused a little bit more of a stressful situation leading up to the start area. So we got to the start area, I did a workout, I did a little run, I had some more of my energy drinks, and we were thinking, we're at the start area, so maybe 10 minutes before the marathon, we will just join the queue and join the pen, and off we go on our merry way. So we were really close, 10 minutes out, no, maybe 15 minutes out from the marathon. So we started to walk to the pen area, and then we were told, no, this is not the way, you need to go that way. And at this point, there were loads of runners walking around, dropping their bags off, getting ready for their race. So we ended up actually sort of following a set of runners in the completely wrong direction. We were actually heading towards the finish line, which we thought was probably right. Maybe there was a way to cut in to the start area. But when we got to the finish line, we were told, no, don't come here, go back to the start area. So we had to do a quick march back to the start area, and we found the way in to the sort of start pen area. And that was literally 5 minutes before the marathon was starting. So I had a 5-minute, period to get all my gels in my belt, to get my hydration on, to set up my watch, to set up the music, to set up this camera. So that was quite a panicky 5 minutes. And I also noticed at that point, I was sweating. I'd only just realised after all that, after the workout, after the little run, after the frog march to the finish area and back to the start area, that it was actually really quite humid. A lot more humid than it had been. Obviously, Abu Dhabi is hot and relatively humid all year round, but this was on a different level. I realised that it was so humid. I was already sweating and I was already drenched, and there was cloud cover. So that was my first indication that this weather was not gonna help.
Horrific.
This was gonna be a variable that would make this marathon really tough. Now, because I didn't know it was gonna be that humid, I didn't really focus too much on drinking adequate water beforehand. I did have a few sips, but if I'd known or realized or felt that it was humid, as it was, I would have taken on more liquids before the race had started. So I think that was a big factor, just that realization of it being so humid, and knowing that I know there are aid stations, water stations where you can get water, but I would have drunk more water. I would have carried a smaller bottle of water as well, just to see me through that first few kilometers of the race. And when I started to run early on as 4K, I realized that this was going to be tough. I mean, I was drenched. It looked like I'd already ran a marathon. This was only 4K in, so this was only like 15, 20 minutes in, and I was drenched. And as the marathon progressed, it got more hotter, it got more humid, it got more cloudy. So it was just like running in a sauna, which is not particularly ideal when you're chasing a marathon, when you're chasing a personal best in a marathon. So any grand ideas of meeting my goal time were out the window. I knew that this humidity would have a mega impact on finish time. And as it proved, it was the case. And the race itself, the race course itself, the race started and it was generally flat. And I previously looked at the course elevation, and Google told me that it was flat, and it looked pretty flat. But there were hills. There were not mega hills, not mountainous hills like Muscat is famous for, but there were gradual hills, and you certainly knew about it when you were at the top of those hills. And yes, there were down bits as well, but then quite quickly there was another gradual incline. And I think that surprised me. That surprised my calves in particular, enough to give them sort of slight cramps very early on, 20 kilometers in, 13 miles in, I started to get calf cramps, not just in one leg, in both legs.
Horrific.
So I knew I was up for a struggle. I knew I was up for a fight for this marathon. And those calf cramps sort of came and went. And at every aid station, I made sure I had, 3-4 sips of water. Obviously, I took my energy gels every 30 minutes, and I had my high carb endurance drink, which was for the last hour and a half. But those calf cramps came and went, and they kind of turned into more of a thigh cramp. So I was dealing with intermittent calf cramps, and then I had a thigh cramp in my right thigh, which then led to not back pain, but certainly an uncomfortable feeling in the back. So I was trying to adjust my running belt to see whether that was causing it. But I just think the calf cramps, the thigh cramps was then leading into my back. And I was making sure my posture, my running form was correct, but everything was starting to cramp basically. And I think my back was starting to cramp as well. I had a pacing strategy. My aim was to finish the marathon, or try and finish the marathon, in 3 hours, 45 minutes. So my pace pro on my Garmin was set to try and achieve that aim. So every kilometre I could see on my watch the planned pace and what pace I was doing. And I think if I'd been more conscious and aware of what the weather was going to be like, I would have probably changed the pace pro. I would have put slower paces in at the beginning. I think the pace pro, even though it was set up to achieve that goal, I just think it was too fast. I just think for those conditions, the weather and the hills, the pace that I was doing, for me, was just too fast at the start. And you can see on the screen that, you know, the early paces, and I stuck relatively close to these paces, but as the kilometers and the miles ticked by, it did become a struggle to keep up with those paces. And another thing about the weather, headwinds.
There's a massive headwind, which is making this absolutely horrific.
There were huge headwinds, I would say, for 50% of the entire race. Something that I've never really trained in before. So this constant headwind was literally pushing me back. That had a major impact. I was fighting not only against the humidity, the hills, I was now fighting against this headwind, which I'd never experienced before. So it was a battle. It was a complete battle against the weather. And as the sun rose, another thing that I realized was I wasn't actually wearing my running sunglasses. I'd completely forgotten them. At the start area, at that sort of, you know, panicky 5 minute before the start of the race, I'd completely forgotten my running sunglasses. And I always run with my running sunglasses. So I had the sun beaming down on me, and obviously I was squinting with the rays of the sun. So that was another issue that impacted. And I think I would have brought a hat if I'd known how sort of humid and hot it was and how powerful that sun was. It was really, really hot for, you know, 8 o'clock. It was getting really hot. That sun was really beaming down. So I would have worn a running hat as well. I completely forgot that. There were a huge portion of the course where there was nobody around. I must have ran an 8K stretch, an 8 kilometer stretch where there were no fellow runners, there were no spectators.
And look, absolutely no one around.
It was, you know, in the middle of a community with nobody around. At one point, I didn't even know whether I was on the right course. Yes, there were a few bollards, but I wasn't quite sure whether I was on the right track, the right road. So I think that sort of had an impact, played on my mind a little bit. I think that caused me to be a bit, you know, like, is this the right way? Is this not the right way? You know, where's everybody else? So I think that had an impact on the way I was thinking, the way the marathon was going. And normally I'm pretty strong, I'm pretty mentally strong. I can get through those sort of tough moments where you don't have the support. But I think just the culmination of everything that was going on, you know, the weather, you know, the cramps, you know, the lack of fellow runners, the lack of support, lack of crowds really did start to have an impact. And all the volunteers, you know, at the aid stations were amazing. I've got to say, they were superb, quick to hand out water, lots of cheering and celebrating. And there were occasions throughout the marathon where there were bands playing. So that was really, really nice. And also I do remember in one of those stretches where there was absolutely nobody around apart from me and my thoughts, there was a set of shops. And I just remember a little kid, a little boy, just ran out from the shops with a bottle of water, and he sort of ran out in front of me, and obviously he spoke in Arabic, and he handed it to me, and he started to clap and dance and wave as I ran past. It was just a really nice moment, you know, off a stretch of road where there was absolutely nobody, and then all of a sudden a little boy came running out to hand a bottle of water to me. I thought that was really, really nice, and that did really spur me on. You know, and I went in wanting or trying to get a personal best. That didn't happen, but I finished, and I finished my 10th marathon. So really, really proud of how, even though I faced a catalogue of challenges, I'm really proud that I actually did finish the marathon, like I say, in one piece. So yeah, lots of challenges, lots of difficulties, a very tough marathon, but lots to learn and improve on for the next one. And obviously I made a few mistakes leading up to the marathon, and that's something that I will try and fix for the next one. You know, marathons are tough. There's absolutely no question that every marathon throws surprises, but I was surprised at how many surprises and challenges this marathon threw at me. But at the end of the day, I finished the marathon in one piece, lots of stories to tell, and lots of things to learn from. So if you found any value at all in that video, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and follow along. And don't forget to leave a comment down below. What's your toughest marathon you've ever done? Are you thinking about doing a marathon? Have I put you off? So until the next one, and there will be a next one, there'll definitely be a next video, and there'll be definitely another marathon. So until the next one, I'll see you soon.